Hello, can you hear me now? Um, oh, this is why you always check levels. I think my microphone was working, but I think it's been a while and OBS decided to use something else instead of my microphone, which was always fun. I love it when things default to be precisely the thing that I don't want them to be. Thank you very much. It would have been great if I had the whole stream with no audio. Delightful. Okay, so this is another issue that I've had, which is that the macros don't expand and I get these weird errors. I'm not sure exactly why, but it usually, if you just if you reload, sometimes it goes away, sometimes it doesn't. We shall see. Okay, so to go over a brief outline of the architecture of the way it works, there's a back-end Rust server which runs an embedded SurrealDB database, and that also hosts a Svelte front end, which then they communicate via a WebSocket to render items. And the idea is that at the moment that's basically notes, but that could be a lot more sophisticated in the future. Let's have a look at. Yes, and this error has returned. Very odd. I think it usually compiles okay, but it's just very annoying. And it messes up with the Rust Analyzer stuff often. Anyway, the way that the code works, just to have a look at the main function, is that we've got a state struct, which has an arc to the inner state. It's a bit of indirection there, and that inner state struct at the moment just has a database connection. Obviously you could add a lot of other stuff there, and I've got a method. This I believe is this is a helper method I've made that basically just wraps around SurrealDB functions that makes or loads an existing file. And then this is async, so we await it and then unwrap it, and then the whole thing will just panic if there's an error with that, which is fine. If we can't load the database, we can't do very much. So then I'm to serve the to do the WebSockets and to serve the website. I'm using Warp, mainly because it works and it can do both at the same time. Things like Actix, very difficult to do that, because you need to use the old. When I was looking into it, it's an old mess, and you have to use the old Actix model instead of using Tokyo like the modern version. But then there's so I basically just set up the WebSocket route, which is on WebSocket, and I set up the path. At the moment, this is just serving a directory, a website directory. But another thing that I would be interested in looking into is that you can there's a macro that you can do to embed it in the binary. And then you can, so I could serve that from the binary. So I think that would be really interesting to do, because then you could ship one binary and then it would serve the web page from the binary, because Svelte renders it out and then you're set. And then basically just set it going. So for the website itself, just serves those files, is fairly simple. But then what I've done is, let me go to definition. I have an HTTP handler, which this is only for WebSockets, so it's fairly basic. It takes the state, which where are we? So what happens is then we use this and add state, and that basically takes the request and injects that state variable from here, and what it will clone that, which because we're using an arc, what happens is that there's an allocation that holds the inner state, and and what we'll do is we have a pointer which points to it, and then we just clone that pointer, so it all is to the same database and all works together. And normally to do this you would require some kind of concurrency primitive such as a mutex, but if I remember correctly, that's unnecessary here because the database, that's sort of built into the database connection construct already. But if I was going to add other fields to the inner state struct, I'd need to wrap them in a mutex or something similar. Okay, so this HTTP handler is very basic. It just forwards it on to this function. So this file is a lot more involved, but I think just following through the structure of it. Again, I'm not sure if this is the best way to do it, but this is what I sort of ended up with over trial and error. So it takes the WebSocket struct and the state, and in order to send messages at various points and sort of deal with multiple things at the same time, and deal with multiple connections at the same time, and to transmit and receive separately, basically, we use the there's a library, the futures util, I think, and basically what that does is it takes the WebSocket and it splits it into a transmitter and a receiver, and then we make another channel, and then we and then we turn that into sync. Can't remember exactly what that does, but basically messing around so it makes it work. And then we spawn a task using Tokyo, and then we move all of that in. So what we're basically just listening to messages on the WebSocket, and then because this the WebSocket connection is called once when it connects, and then this task lives for the lifetime of the website, is basically the way that it works. So in a more traditional API, what you might have is the website here, and then somebody search for something, I'll send a request, and just pinging like that, and then each one getting a response back. But with WebSockets allows things to be sent back real time over one long-lived connection. So it's nice for this kind of things, and it makes it a lot more flexible. Sorry, I've got a bit of a sore throat. Okay, so basically what we've done is set up so we can send and transmit, and the way that I've done it is that we are waiting. One of the nice things about this API is that of the sync and the streams is that you can basically treat it as an iterator. So what we can do is we can take the receiver, and we can just wait for we can wait for the next one, and then we wait. So basically what that will do is it will call next as though it were a normal iterator, but then if there's nothing there immediately, it will yield execution. Then this task is doing its own thing, and the reason that that's there is because it allows us to use this Rx to transmit via the WebSocket, so I can clone that and I can send that to wherever we want. Instead of handing out the WebSocket transmitter. I don't remember. There's a reason why I had to do that. I don't remember what it is. Okay, so then this is the main loop where we're saying we're on the WebSocket rx.next.await, so this loop runs every time there's a new message. And we're saying if it's some new message. And so the while, one of the really nice things about Rust is it's kind of function, sort of one of the functional properties or the elements from functional programming, that almost everything is an expression. So that means this let sum is basically pattern matching and also an assignment. So the way that the struct for the receiver from the WebSocket works is that if there's no messages, it just hangs. There's nothing there. And then when there's a message, it's wrapped in the sum enum. The option is either sum or none. And then when the WebSocket closes, it returns none. And so what this does is it very nicely says, while some elements are still coming through, we want to loop over this. But when there's nothing left, then we just continue going. In this case, we just end the function. So then what we want to do is and then inside the message, it can be either OK or an error. And if it's an error, then we print it out. The error handling is not necessarily done very well. Probably want a logging file. That might be another thing to look into. And then we just break out of the function. If there's some error in the WebSocket, then we just shut it down. But if it's OK, the message is valid, it's all worked, then we want to look. We're interested in the text primarily. And so I've got this other handle text message, which is the main thing, and then we pass the message and then a clone of the state and a clone of the transmitter, which will send back up to the website, and then that spawns it in a separate task, because what you wouldn't want to happen is that might do a lot of database operations or computations, or that might be waiting for something else, we don't know. But if another message comes in that's really quick, we'd want to deal with that straight away. So basically what this is doing is it's saying, there's this message, okay, go deal with that over there. I'm going to have a look and see if there's another message coming in. And then if it's binary, then we just ignore it, basically, because we don't support binary messages, but that's fine, so we just print that out. And if it's a close, then we return out of the function. And this is, I suppose, is void. It just returns the unit type, so that just X's out. Okay, so the interesting stuff is in the handle text message. So the way that I've implemented the API for this is just using JSON, because it's the easiest thing to do, I suppose. Down the line, I saw a really interesting, I can't remember who it was, but using Rust to build a profiler on a website, and that was using Rust WASM, and then they were using, that means that they could share the structs between the front end and the back end, and they were using Postman, which is a kind of serialization algorithm that's good for that kind of thing. Sorry, I have to make this bigger. I forgot to do that. That's too big. Okay. To connect between them, which I like the idea of. Stealth is pretty cool, but I think it would be an interesting thing to try, that kind of passing back and forth. So what I do is in the message, I turn it into a string, just sort of doing what is necessary for the types, and then I print that out, and then I do using SurrealDB to deserialize that into this struct. So one of the really nice things about Rust is that I have defined in Rust what the structure of my API is, and then all I have to do is I say I want a request struct, and so SurrealDB, could you please give me one of those? And if it's okay, then it's just that. Otherwise, it's none, and something's gone wrong, and we print that error out. So let's have a look at this request struct, because this has changed a bit from last time. Let me turn off error lens, because that is incredibly annoying. Okay. Right. So the way that I've defined request is there's an enum of what you might want to do. So I was doing create, read, update, delete. CRUD is kind of a classic thing. I'm not sure if that's the ideal thing to do, but that is have done it so far. And what I've done that allows me to get this from JSON is just do this derive serialize, deserialize. If I wanted to turn it into JSON, then I would do serialize. And that is just a very nice thing that you can do with the SurrealDB crate and with the macros. Now, I've done this in a somewhat clunky way, and I think subsequently to this, I was watching one of John's streams, and I think it was him, and he was showing that there's ways that there's lots of fancy ways that you can tag different fields to get around some of the weird things that I'm doing here, but it works for now. So basically, within the request, you can have create, read, update, delete, and we have, and then each of these has its own struct defining what the delete hasn't been implemented yet. Hence why there's nothing in it. But so if you're making a create request, then there's a specific structure for the create, read, and update. So right below, here they are. So for create, we just have an item, and I have an item struct. There's an item. I want to make this, add this to the database. It's fairly straightforward. For the read request, I've done it's a string, and then that string will get parsed and allow you to search. That would be one of the things, if I develop this further, that would be changed the most, because one of the things that I've just sort of started on the front end a little bit adding, but I need to add on the back end, is tags and linking. Well, for this, it would mainly be the tags and categories and things like that. Basically, other things that allow you to search in more sophisticated ways. But at the moment, basically just searching on the main text field. And then for update, there's you have the ID and then an item. So at the moment, I'm basically saying here's the ID of the item that I want to update, and here's an item struct, and you basically just stick that in there. And I think at the moment that it basically just erases the old one. But one of the things that I really want to do is do versioning and things like that, and I think that's one of the things that SurrealDB will be able to help with directly, as opposed to implementing that on top. I'm not sure that I can do it now, but certainly as it develops, that's something that I should be able to take advantage of in SurrealDB. So because I have those structs, and because they handle text message, because of those structs, what I can do is I've got my request, I've got my rec, which is this struct, and because it's laid out in an enum, I can just match on it. I can say, oh, if it's create, then I want to handle create, and if it's a read, I want to handle read, and if it's an update, I want to handle update, and I just pass I pass the request, the state, and the transmitter through, and then I'm set. now, obviously, those functions are slightly more complicated. The way that, but it's not too bad. So the way that handle create works is, should talk a little bit about. Now, just to note, this is SurrealDB beta 8 that I have been using. And beta 9 has come out recently, but I haven't really had time to look into it very much. But I think that's quite a big change. I don't know how much has changed in the API, but I might make a video on that a bit later. But I think things are getting interesting. And a lot of what I'm doing in here, and I'll touch on this in a minute, could be improved both on my end and I think also in SurrealDB with some more macros and some more libraries to make it nicer to work with, because there's some of the boilerplate which I think might, especially with SurrealDB, you could make more efficient, and you could make sort of the developer ergonomics a bit nicer. So basically what I do is, to interact with the database, you generate a query using SQL, but it's SurrealQL, which is not confusing at all, but there we are. It's very similar to SQL, but with some fancy things. And then you also pass in a variable map, which they use a binary tree map for. And basically you just use $signs in the query to refer to keys in the map. It's fairly straightforward. So I just initiate a new instance of the map, and then one of the things that I think I'm quite pleased with in terms of the implementation is that I take the item out of the request, and then I've made this add to vars function. Now this basically what it does is it allows you to be generic over the type of item that you're adding. At the moment there's just a note and a person, but what this will do is it make it very easy to add new ones. That's basically the idea. And so then I generate the query by the query to set those fields, because I don't know what the fields are at compile time. So what I want to do is I iterate over the vars, over the variables that I've just made, and that will give that's an iterator over string and value, but I only want the key, so that's the strings. Now what I've done is I've mapped that, and this is a closure. I'm basically saying I want to take the key and whatever the other thing is, I don't care about that. So the underscore just basically gets rid of it, and then I format that with using this macro, and I'm basically saying this key, because the name of the fields in the database are the same as in the structs and in the map, equals $this, and so that means that in the SurrealDB engine it will go out and look into the map and to get it. And then I just collect them into a vector, and then I join them comma separated, so it works. It feels, I don't know, it feels a bit odd to sort of be generating this sort of text query and then sending it to another bit running in the same binary, which then interprets it and does stuff. So I don't know if there's any practical way to sort of cut out that link, or how much it even really matters. I'm not sure. Then I print it out, and then I just basically add that in to create item. And this is, if you think about it in a traditional database, this is basically the table. And then I just set the time created to time now. And then the way that you actually do that in the database is I take the state, which is now what I can do is I can do state dot data. It's dscon because it's data store connection, which is a type from SurrealDB. But the reason that I can do that, now you might think that if we go back to state, State only doesn't have any fields. It's an arc, which is an atomic reference counted pointer. So why can I do that? And that's because it dereferences to in a state, which is one of the nice things. Which is basically it's transparent in a certain way, so we can get this out, and then we can execute. We just pass in the query, the variables, and say that we don't need to do it strictly, and then we await and unwrap it. So that will panic if anything goes wrong, but that's maybe what we want to do, maybe not. But it feels awfully gloomy. Oh right. So that's, and then because I don't know if this is something that I'd want to keep sort of in general, but what I do is whenever you create whenever you add something to the database, I also return everything. Yeah. So what I do, I just select all from items and then I send them back. So this is, I do another execute. That's the query, just a literal this time. No variables because I'm just selecting everything. And then this is some of the, I think you can see in one of the previous streams, it took me a while to figure out, but there's a lot of layers of wrapping when you get the answer out. So because you can have, if I remember quickly, in a transaction with the database, you can have multiple queries. So because we're only doing one, we want to index 0. Then we want the output of that, and then we want to unwrap that, and that gives us a reference to value, which is sort of this main enum which stores things in the database, and that is basically a wrapper over a whole bunch of different things. You can have arrays, dictionaries, numbers, strings, all sorts of things, and so then this should be an array of the rows. So we want to, hence why we do the if let value array rows equals select result, which is what we should have, and then we construct the then we use SurrealDB to serialize it, and then we just wrap that in the message text struct, and then we just send it along its way, and then we use this tx.send will then hit that other process that we generated earlier, which will then forward it through and send it up through the WebSocket. And the handle read basically contains this same section of code, except it does some pre-processing basically to allow you to search. So what it does is it takes this is a bit okay, so I'm not sure quite why I've done this and this, but the way that basically the idea is that if you have double ampersand separated, then you can search for multiple things and it will make sure that they're all in there, which is sort of semi-useful here, but in one of my previous projects where which I think I've done some streams on, where you can energy stats, where it has indexed a bunch of papers and allows you to search for them and see graphs, then that's really useful because you might want to say that was to do with energy, so you might want to say I want gas But I also want it to be in Canada, or I want it to be in the North Dome, or I want it to be, wherever else, North Sea. So basically, when I'm just splitting them up, and then I'm basically turning that into something that is in the right format, and this tilde means is sort of equivalent of in SQL of the like. I think it does a sort of it's a non-case sensitive search basically. It's still not a very sophisticated searching algorithm, but I think that's things like that might be coming soon. So basically, in order to do that, I split it. Split it up, and then I add them on. Fine. Actually, I can't remember. I'm not sure if I think I started implementing that. I don't think I finished that. Anyway, that's the idea, and then I just run that, and I do the code that I did before. And then updates. Update is fairly similar, except I've turned the ID field into this record struct, which is a SurrealDB primitive, one of the value types, and then I use the set instead of the create. Update instead of create, which is and then basically the same things, and then I return it as well. That really should be split out into another function. So that's the main essence of the back end. The one thing that I think would be interesting to look at is, let's have a look at this. So the item struct is an enum over the different types. So this is basically another way of it, the way that it builds builds it up, and this will then be deserialized. So I just have a note and a person. Those are the only two ones at the moment, and then I have in that two vars, I basically just append another map to the one existing, and so what I do is I make it so that there's a way of turning the struct itself into a binary tree map. Now, there might be able to do this through Serde or something like that. Probably is a way, but the way that I did it is I just created a trait, which is toMap, which just takes a reference to self and returns a binary tree map of strings and values, which is SurrealDB values. Because Serde also has a value trait which is very similar. They sort of same idea. And then so for the note, that just has one field, which is text, which just stores a string. And then what I do in the toMap implementation is just generate a new map, and then I insert a key, a type key, which then is note, and then and then I just return the map. And these are identical. And this is something that I think should fairly easily be able to be generated by a macro. So I think this would be a really interesting example, because basically what you'd need to do is look at the name of the struct and then put that in there in lowercase, and then look at each of the fields and then just generate this here, but with this bit and that bit changed out to be whatever the field name is. But basically what this allows me to do is for the create and insert things to not care what the actual type is. The annoying thing about the way that the request and the item structs are done is because they're all enums, that there's a lot of wrapping. So what I'd have is, and the way that looks in the JSON is that you'd have, the top level, and then you'd have create, colon, and then curly braces, and then inside the create request you'd have item, colon, item, and then inside that you'd have note, colon, and then curly braces again, and then text, colon, and then finally what your text is. So I think what you should be able to do is basically tag that. So instead of having instead of having note, colon, curly braces, and then text, colon, the actual text, I could just have type, colon, note, and then another field in the same level. I'm not sure how much difference it really makes, but it just seems slightly inelegant. So then in the in the Svelte front end, I think is a bit janky, I might say, but basically the way that I've done it, which I'm not sure is a very good way to do it, but it sort of works. I'm not very good at front end stuff. I will readily admit. I much prefer the back end stuff. Not that it's necessarily the best way to do it, but I enjoy doing that a lot more. So basically the way that I've done it is I have a variable which is UI mode, and then I just use Svelte's if else blocks to basically render different pages depending on what that is. So basically when it starts, I make a connection back to 5000 WebSockets, so that this then will call that HTTP handler, which will then forward onto the WebSocket handler, which will then create a new task, which will then listen on the WebSockets. That's what we were looking at earlier. And then when it starts, it sends that read message. So you can see here we have read and then just an empty struct, and then if it's none, then it just gives us all the items, which is what we want. And then whenever there's a message, we take the data and we parse it, so it goes from JSON into actual JavaScript objects, and then we map over them, and we parse the dates, so that will allow us to sort them, because they're just stored as Unicode, epoch, not Unicode, as a number since, number of seconds since 1st of January 1970 or whatever. So this turns it into the internal JavaScript representation, so that makes it easier to sort on them. And then I've got a variable which tells us which way to display them, and so that basically just sorts them depending on what that says. And then if it's closed, it closes. I was trying to look into ways that if the WebSocket connection dropped, that it would try again, and that it would do, if it dropped, it would try again immediately, then it would try again after half a second, then a second, then 2 seconds. And then also and then after a while it would stop, but then if you clicked back onto the page, it would try again. I messed around with that for quite a while to limited success. I'm sure there is a way to do it, but yeah, I don't like browser stuff, so I might try again at some point. But I have one of the nice if blocks in Svelte, and I just say if it is closed, then I just display WebSocket disconnected, which is quite convenient. So let me see if I can actually get this. If I actually run it, and then let me. Okay. So here you can see I just opened it up. You can see we have had a request. So you can see the reward request is going to be read nothing, and then this is what it gets passed into. So you can see that it's the read variant of the request enum, which contains a read request, which contains search text none, there, which gets converted into select all from item. Not sure what that is. And then this is what we get back, which then gets rendered into this. Very lovely. So these are, you can see, I'll show you this later, have a little drop down, you can see the different types. I'm not exactly sure how to try and display them at the same time. So at the moment, because they have different schemas basically. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. SurrealDB can be schema or schemaless, but I'm running it schemaless by default, and what that allows me to do is store the different types of item in the same table, basically, which would be which you couldn't do in SQL or a standard relational, in MySQL or a standard relational database. So that's something I think is quite nice. So if I search test and I search, most of them have test in, surprise, surprise. Let me put note in, can search that, only those ones show up. And then you can, if you look in here, you can see that we have the read search text search test, and then that gets turned into the same read request, but this we have some test, and then select all from item where text is like text search. Yeah, and so that displays that. And then what I have done is, so the button, when you click it, it just, if it's blank, it turns it into null, which will then get turned into the none variant, which is what we want. And then we JSON.stringify that, and then this, as you can see, is basically the structure. And then we set the UI mode to view, which basically means if you search, you want to see stuff, so it sets that. And then all the add button does is it sets the mode to create. And you can see here I have the view, create, update, and also is making there's also inspect, which is basically when you view one specific thing. So the view code, this is all Svelte basically. What it does is I have a list of all the types, which let me go up and we can see here. So I have the item types, which basically outlines the schema for it. So I have a note, and that has a title, which is a text and has the label title. I also have the text field, which has the label text, and I think I added this field, but not in the database. Anyway, another thing that I could do is I could either make it so the front end is also Rust, or and then so they could actually share the structs, or I could make it so that the back end basically has an initial message, and it basically constructs this schema using macros, from the statically defined types in the database, and then it basically sends those up, because this can change at any time, so there's no reason that basically I couldn't have this one page, and depending on where it's connecting to, it would have different types. So yeah, I think that would be pretty neat to do, but a bit further down the line. So basically what this does is I take this each is a construct in Svelte which basically allows you to iterate over something, which is very useful, and then basically generate, then have some HTML for each of those. So what I'm doing is I have a select, and then each of the options come as those types, which is this thing here, this menu. And then I create a table which has a column header for each of the types. Again, I get the keys out, and then each of those is a type, and then I have a type. And then I do the same thing, except, and now to actually populate the actual fields, I just filter them on the right type so they show up properly, and then I've also made it so if you click on the field, then you get this menu where you can see just one at a time. One of the annoying things is the back buttons don't work because it's all on one page. Now that I think there is an API that allows you to basically set back points and interact with that, but then what I'd have to do is I'd have to store basically a stack, I think, of the state. Basically, what are the view states, what are the search strings, stuff like that, which wouldn't be too bad, but I'd have to do. So basically, go search. So anyway, if you click anywhere on here, it jumps you to this view. That's something I'll show you how that works later. Yeah, so we basically filter by them. We make it so if you click on them, it jumps to the inspect thing. And then also there's the update button, and when you click that, it calls this UI update, which is I guess slightly confusing, because what that does is it switches you to the update version of the UI and then it takes the item that you pass in, it sets that as sets the ID as the opt item and the opt type. Where are we? Right, yeah, so that's how the update works. Basically just fills the rest, and it's fairly straightforward. Okay, so then create, you can just click on this add, and it has these, again, this same menu here, and then depending on that schema, it generates these fields. So it's basically more of the same. But one thing that did cause me a lot of problems was because those fields are dynamically generated, sort of packaging them up to send was a bit annoying. So what I did is, basically going over the item types here, and then op types. So that will give me, so basically item types op type gives me all of the fields inside the type that I'm interested in. Then I take the entries, and then I iterate over that. And then what we do is that if it's a text field, then we generate an input with that name and ID, and then we also take the label for that as well. So these labels are dynamically generated, and then we name these according to the field, which is what allows us to get them later. Because when you click on the button to add, it creates an empty struct, which is the draft, which then it puts stuff into. and then you iterate over those same keys, and you get the element by ID of the field that you want, and then you take them out. Basically, and then that's how you construct it. But it's a bit of a fiddle, and I don't know. I always think the point of having a library like Svelte is that you get out of direct DOM manipulation. So I'd really like if there was I was looking into things like having components with events that would then bubble things up and then catching those and collecting them, but yeah, it I don't know, I couldn't make it work, but this does work. One of the annoying things about those, it is very confusing. But it does work. I suppose, come to think of it, what I could do instead of this is if I got the form, I could then walk the child nodes of that and collect things if there were inputs, something like that. But it works. I then I create an object called item to send. This is the sort of the packing that I was talking about. So once I've got the draft item, I then need to put that inside another object that has the type. So in the case that I'm adding a note, I'm going to have this draft item is going to contain my text field. I then make this new object which I put it in with, and it's going to be note, and I have to use the braces because I don't, that's a variable that I'm using to index into it. And then I take that, and then I make a new object, which item : that item I send, and then another one inside, which then is create. So you get this very nested structure. If I if I create a note that says, I don't think this will so if I add, then we can see here, now you see this is undefined because it's not actually stored in the database, but you can see here that it has appeared. There are lots of awesome people watching. Maybe lots is a bit of an exaggeration, but those who are awesome by definition. Yeah, so we send that on. And what you can, and then you can see here, where are we? Where's the create? Oh, maybe I don't print out the create ones. It's a bit odd. Anyway, somewhere in here should be that, but it's basically, that's a lot of layers, is what I was trying to say. The update is basically the same as the add. If I go to update, it's basically the code copied, except at the end you send the op item as the ID. Yeah, that's basically it, and then you have update instead of create. So the only other thing is in the inspect, one of the things that I wanted is, so in one note you'll be able to link to another one, and then when you click on it, it does go, and you'll be able to see that in this one. So if you look here, you can see that there's lots of this nonsense, but when you click on here, it all looks nice. And if you click on person, then it jumps to that one there. Haven't quite got around to making it highlight or the cursor look nice or anything, but that shouldn't be too difficult. But basically, that's the idea, that you can link between them, and then also that those links would be represented in the database And so you'd be able to see which one's linked to the note you're currently looking at, and you'll be able to search through, and you'll be able to have that sort of graph traversal as well as the normal searching. So the way that works is basically there's in Svelte there's this way that you can use this at HTML. You can render HTML, because obviously normally it wouldn't, and normally you really wouldn't want it to, but it does. And then I use this. Oh, don't want that. Attach span click event listeners, which is basically this code here, which it runs when it's mounted, and it basically walks through the children, and it adds a function on the handle click to this UI inspect. So I mean, it's that's pretty neat. And so I could do lots of other things that way. There's probably a much more elegant way. I mean, I just wrote it as a span with that ID field. I think there would be a much more elegant way to store that and render it, but it works for now. And I will think about that. And obviously I added that in manually, but what you would want to do would be to make it so I could, let's say I use hash or some other special character to link to something, and then I type it, and then I have a menu that shows up that I can click on, and then it does that all automatically under the hood. So I think that would be an interesting thing to work on, but it's also UI code, which I don't really like. But it's it would be nice to work on that. So I think that's a pretty comprehensive rundown of how it works so far. Especially the UI, things are a bit sketchy. I would say probably not best practices have been followed. I don't know about in the back end, but I think it's very about to be sort of working through and iterating it, and changing, for example, the way that the item structs. I originally didn't have the item structs. You just had one field, and then I added that, and that changed quite a few things. So I think that I might be able to have it more directly if I did it straight off the bat. But I think it works quite nicely, and I think that this could be taken and developed a bit further, which I think would be nice to do. And also, I think what would be really interesting is to try and take advantage of some of the more interesting features of Surreal, that kind of graph connections, and the other ways of searching and by the tags, and categories and other items. It's very flexible. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. So I hope everybody who was watching enjoyed. Let me know if you have any questions. I will try and do more videos soon. A lot of A-levels on, so I'll be studying, so maybe not very much in the next 2 months, but come the summer, definitely be hoping to do more. So hopefully I'll try and do some more streams on this. I want to try and make a video on the beta 9. I think that's very interesting, and maybe some more introductory stuff around using SurrealDB, some other maybe simpler projects. So there's various things in the works. So stay tuned. Thank you for watching, and I'll